Well, we've got a full commission in attendance here, so I think we can start. So are we good to go?
Yes.
Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. So can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Director Cody,
Cody's here.
Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Zimmer,
Here.
Chairperson Ohilski.
Present. Okay, so do we have anybody that would like to make comments before we move on to our substantive items on the agenda?
None from me.
Nobody?
Let's get substantive.
Okay, let's move.
Well, I think Director Cody had a presentation that he wanted to provide on a recent project completed by S&T Mutual. And so I was thinking that this might be a good spot for that.
Okay, well, let's do it.
Okay. Okay, so this, Dan asked me to provide some information about the meter telemetry upgrade project that S&T Mutual completed in June. And S&T, everybody knows us, but just for a little introduction, we're one of the 3 water purveyors in Los Osos. We were formed in 1961, and we have 179 metered water service connections serving a population of 591. Next slide, please. S&T installed our first point-of-sale water meters in 2010 and began billing on a volume rate structure in 2011, January of 2011. So we have a pretty new water meter system with Badger disc meters and RTR type registers and CE type radio endpoints. So our meter readings are conducted by near field radio collection every 2 months, and it takes about 4 hours to read our meters, including data reduction and analysis, before we enter that data into our billing system. In 2018, S&T was informed by Badger Meter Company that our RTR radio endpoints would no longer be supported after 2019. And in addition to that, the batteries in those endpoints were going out of warranty in January of 2020, actually December of 2019. And we're beginning to be concerned that we are going to have a maintenance problem. Next slide, please. So after Badger made this announcement, he began to plan an upgrade to our water meters. We didn't want to start to manually read our water meters. We've done that before. Nobody here has experience. We'd have to hire a crew every 2 months to do that. I'm sure the other 2 water purveyors are crying alligator tears about this. But we decided, we did some project planning, and we found that we could do this upgrade without disturbing the existing Badger disc meters. And the upgrade involves only replacing the meter registers and endpoints. And we chose new LTE Type M cellular endpoints. They're ultra low power devices with 20-year warranted battery life. Slide 4, please. So in order to do this, the top of the new LTE endpoints have to protrude through the top of the new custom-made meter box lids. They have to be out in the air, and they can't be in proximity of any metal. Next slide, please. We have some experience at S&T with project management, and we knew we had to be pretty careful about managing this project because we don't have a lot of money. And turning the project into a science project, we know can prevent injuries and damage and save time and money. Next slide, please. So the most important part of the project preparation was conducting a meter box inventory. And ours was not very complicated because our meter boxes aren't very old and we didn't have a lot of propagation of different parts. We had essentially 2 different meter box part numbers in the field. And one of those meter boxes is a large box that often has 2 meters in each box. Sometimes there's 1 meter, sometimes there are 2. So it requires either 1 or 2 meter endpoint protrusions to complete the retrofit. In the end, we chose, after investigating, we chose to design new meter box lid castings, and we hired a casting foundry to cast our meter box components from a concrete polymer. Next slide, please. At first, we thought we were going to core each one of these parts out in the field with a coring tool, a drill press like a mag drill, and do this during the assembly. And you can see that that would have been a mistake. That first of all, it's a considerable percentage of the total project cost is this part of the procedure. And we're really happy that we made these lid castings instead of coring these things in the field. Slide 8, please. In the end, this is the part that's probably most interesting to the other 2 water purveyors, is that our total cost for doing this, in the end, we're finished now, and we're going to do our second meter reading on August 31st with the new system. This new upgrade costs $308 per meter is all. And it's not an inconsequential cost, but what we get with that, and we also have $2,000 per year maintenance cost to support the web-based dashboard, the data dashboards for this system. But that compares pretty well with the Flume system, which costs $200 per copy and doesn't come with the integrated data system. Next slide, please. The big reason for doing this is water conservation. That's the best reason. Being able to see real-time water use data is really mind-boggling at first, but there's a lot to learn about water use and people's hourly, daily, and monthly, weekly, and monthly water use. The dashboard, the AMA dashboard, or Advanced Metering Analytics dashboard, is a very powerful tool. S&T administrators, we've reminded ourselves every day that we're not the water police. We're not using this tool as a policing tool. This is used as a customer service tool. Next slide, please. An example of water conservation is in this old frequency distribution chart. We still produce these every metering cycle, at the end of every 2 months metering cycle. And this chart shows the distribution of our water use among our customers. And you can see that the vertical green dashed line is the median use. That's the balance point. Half of the water users use water in this case, this 2 month period, less than 9,300 gallons, and half of the users used more than 9,300 gallons. And you can see that there were several leaks during this period. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leaks. Not all the water leaks are associated with grotesquely large amounts of water use, but there is one out here that some of you guys are familiar with. The water purveyors see that there's one of our customers used 120,000 gallons of water in 2 months. It never made a wet spot above the ground, And because we only read the meters every 2 months, we have no way of catching this until we read the meters and get a leak flag from the meter reading. So now we have our data is updated every 15 minutes from each one of the meters. And if there's a large change in water use or an alarming amount of water use, we get alarms sent to our cell phones, text messages. Individual users can also set up their accounts and send themselves personal alarms about water use. Next slide, please. So staff members and customers have access to a web-based dashboard to take a look at their water systems. Water company staff members can see everyone's water use, and this is 30% of the dashboard that a staff member can see. That's up on the screen right here. Staff members can see statistics for all meters, number of meters, detected leaks, number of meters with backflow, and that's interesting. That's something we never saw before, didn't really understand, and numbers of meters with no recent flow. There's also information about communication health for the system and for individual meters. Customers can log into their account and put their monthly, weekly, daily, and hourly flow history, and they can configure alarms for themselves so that they get notified for certain conditions. Next slide, please. This slide is just about, this is the leak screen. So if you push the button on the number of leaks currently happening on the system, it comes with this screen, which has a map of where all the leaks are currently occurring and the magnitude of those leaks. You can press the plus button on any one of these water accounts and see, next screen, please. And you can see history of water use. This screen shows daily use for 31 days of August. And you can see I printed this screen on the 22nd of August, and you can see the amount of water flow each day. The next screen, next slide, please. The next screen shows an example of a water leak. This is the hourly display for a particular user who's having 17 gallons per hour of continual use over consecutive 1 hour periods in a 24-hour time frame. So this is what a water leak looks like in the new system. This example here, this water leak would end up costing an extra 24,000 gallons in a 2-month water bill if no one caught this during a 2-month metering period. And that's it. Next screen, please. That is the quick 8-minute presentation, and I will close my mouth now. If there are any questions, you can ask Dan.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Very good presentation, I thought. Very interesting.
Yeah, not necessarily a question. This is Dan Heimel, Executive Director, but a comment. And thank you again for sharing, Director Cote. I think it's beneficial that we learn about the different projects that the purveyors are taking on to improve their water infrastructure systems and water conservation. And then just anecdotally, I can attest the damage that a water leak can do. Over the summer, I was out on vacation and came back to a leak on my irrigation system, which, once we found, we promptly fixed. But the ironic thing is I happen to have one of those flume metering devices that Director Cote referenced that are available to LLCSD customers that give you real-time notifications around leaks and usage. but unfortunately mine was sitting on my workbench waiting to be installed. And so didn't do me much good, but subsequently has been installed. And I agree, being able to see real-time water usage is a great tool for detecting leaks, but also better understanding the water use patterns at your house or commercial business. So.
This is Bruce. Yeah, very, very interesting. And I wondered, do Golden State and LOCSD have comparably sophisticated metering systems?
Ron, do you want to talk to that? Well, I can just say we're not up to that level yet, but we do have, when you can get the flume meter that allows, as Dan said, for real time, and I have that. And I did have a leak, and I got the notification from Flume. So, is Ron?
This is Mark with Golden State. We don't have that type of system installed on our meters. We are reading the meters on a bi-monthly basis and notifying the customers of leaks.
Well, it's the future, but I think that is very nicely done by S&T, and I think that was a very good presentation. So thank you, Charlie. Anybody have anything else before we move on to our action items here? Okay, we'll move on to item number 4 then, Dan, the consent agenda. We have 2 items on there, the approval of the minutes from the June 17th, 2020 meeting and the approval of the warrants, budget update, and invoice register through August 2020. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we go to public comment?
No comments from me, Mark.
Okay. All right, Laura, can you take us to public comment, please?
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9, or if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. Again, that is *9 or raise your hand. All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Very good. I just wanted to say I'm so impressed by the S&T direction that they've taken, and I know it's on a smaller scale, but I think the flume might be the next step that should be implemented. I wanted to ask if Golden State is offering the flume device. I had heard that it's not offered, and I would urge them to add that in if they possibly can, and maybe have an article in the Estero News or something to alert people that this is a great tool to invest in. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment, Laura?
There's no other public comment at this time.
Okay, we'll close public comment and bring it back. Can we have a motion for approval of the consent agenda, please?
Bruce, so moved.
Cody will second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Seeing none, it passes unanimously. Okay, we'll move on to item number 5 then, which is the executive director's report. So Dan, the ball's in your court right now.
Thank you, Chair Ohilski. Yes, Dan Heimel, Executive Director. I'll provide the Executive Director's report. I think as we've done in the last couple of meetings, I'll just focus on the new items that have been updated within the report. And for everyone's reference, those items are underlined within the Executive Director's report just to aid in everyone's ability to see what's changed since the previous report. So starting off with funding and financing, we have an update to the IRWM grant that LOCSD is pursuing for equipping its Upper Aquifer 8th Street well. Since our last meeting, DWR's draft recommendations for full funding of that grant have been finalized, and LOCSD is working with the county to execute an agreement to access those funds and to complete that well project, which is part of Program A. The other updates we have as part of the executive director's report are under the land use planning process update, starting with the Los Osos community plan. The final EIR and public hearing draft for the community plan were released in June. The Planning Commission held 2 hearings, one on July 9th and one on August 13th. At the latest hearing, the Planning Commission asked for some additional information regarding environmentally sensitive habitat areas and continued the community plan item to their October 8th meeting. The other land use related update is the growth management ordinance. This is on a similar track, or is integrated with the community plan. And so it was also heard at the previous 2 planning commission hearings and continued to the October 8th meeting. The other updates in the executive director's report really are just new information on recycled water flow. And currently the only recycled water customer is the Sea Pines Golf Course, but we have new information on recycled water usage at Sea Pines for May, June, and July, as well as updated information on effluent disposal at Broderson at Bay Ridge Leach Fields. And so that concludes the executive director's report. However, I'm available to answer any questions that the directors may have.
Thank you, Dan. So do we have any questions for Dan before we go to public comment? Okay, I guess we have no comments, Dan. You're off the hook here. So can we go to public comment, Laura, please?
Of course. If you would like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. All right, Jeff, you're able to speak.
Thank you, committee members. My name is Jeff Edwards. Does that come through?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, very good. I wanted to cover the ED report. The first item is related to the Planning Commission's consideration of the Los Osos community plan. And I'm not sure if the members have been following the Planning Commission's discussion, but I will tell you that they're fairly confused about water. And probably the first thing that's confusing to them is that the level of severity under the resource summary report, formerly the resource management system, is at a level of severity 3. And given the progress that's been made in terms of the basin metrics, it's a little puzzling why it's still at level of severity 3 and hasn't been adjusted more favorably, say, to level of severity 2. So that's a potential problem. And again, the Planning Commission, I believe, is intending to take action on this plan on October 8th, and they still have the water piece that hasn't been fully developed. And I would hope that this committee could help them, but I'm not sure. It may be a little too late. Regarding growth management, that, like the level of severity 3, is now at 0, and it is scheduled to be elevated. The recommendation is 1.3%, but only after the upper aquifer program A at 8th Street is complete, which is about a year away, and the program C number 2 well, which could be as far as 3 or 4 longer in terms of time to bring online. So I would opt for a more phased in approach. I think we can go to 0.5% right now. And that's what I've asked the Planning Commission to do, and I'd ask your committee to consider. And then lastly, I'd like to reiterate my continued dissatisfaction and objection to delivering so much free water to Sea Pines. To date, they have received 49.71 acre feet of water, and they've done so at a cost that it's like $5,500, if I recall. It's virtually free water, and we need to send that water to Broderson, where Broderson will build a mound that will create a head to push the water through the clay lens, and we can determine if Broderson is going to function as it was intended and to what extent it has seawater intrusion protection. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Laura, do we have anybody else?
We do. Lindy, you're able to speak.
Hi again, Lindy Owen, and I have to, I guess, disagree with Jeff Edwards' comment that level severity 3 should be lowered, because as far as I can tell, we're still in a major drought, and we still don't know how well our planned new wells will add water. Basically, apparently to me, we'll just be taking water from the backside of the basin. It does not mean that we have additional water. It means we can serve more water, but it only because of the seawater intrusion are we switching to the back. So I wanted to put that out. And I guess my other comment was looking at the recycled water that goes to sea pines. I'm a little confused. I thought we were doing 500,000 gallons more or less daily coming through the treatment plant. So I was trying to understand how recycled water reached an amount of 1,412,000 gallons February, and then it's now up to 3,372,900 gallons in July. So I wondered if we could have an explanation of how you're treating 500,000 gallons a day, but we're getting much higher yield. So thank you.
Thank you, Lindy. Anybody else, Laura?
There's no other public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. So does anybody have a response that Lindy's question about the water being generated by the recycle plant?
Yeah. Marshall, this is Bruce. I don't know if our Public Works Department, Mladen Bendoff is on, but I think for another purpose. We know that in the summer months, we basically would be delivering recycled water from the holding ponds that are out at the treatment plant. We know that, places don't need recycled water for irrigation in the winter months, and so that's when the ponds fill up, and in the summer months they are pumped out. So I would expect, without knowing exactly, but that was the intent of how the plant was constructed.
Okay, well, thank you for that information, Bruce.
Yeah, I guess this is Dan. I can add that I think at 500,000 gallons a day over the course of a month would translate to around 15 million gallons in a month. And so so it may just be a sort of a unit conversion question of days versus months.
Okay, well, all right. Well, thank everybody for that. Does anybody else have any comments on the executive director's report before we move to the action items?
Yeah, this is Mark Zimmer. Since we're talking about the effluent flows, one of the things that we've discussed previously, and I'm not sure where it's at to date, is an update on the school, connecting the schools and their reuse opportunity. Maybe it's a discussion we have offline here, but I think it's one of the key areas that we identified early on, and I haven't received any information on that recently.
This is Bruce. We'll contact Public Works and see where we are on that.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
I think staff can have some discussions, and then at our next meeting, we'll agendize that, if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay.
Marshall, this is Charlie from S&T. The largest amount of flow reported here for sea pines is 3.4 million gallons for 30 days in July, which is 112,000 gallons per day, or 22% of the available flow, discharge flow from the wastewater plant.
Okay, thank you for that information. Anybody else have any other comments? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to action item 6. Number 6A is the draft 2020 spring lower aquifer groundwater basin monitoring. So there's a recommendation to receive the update on the early findings for the spring 2020 lower aquifer groundwater monitoring results. So Dan, it's in your court.
Thank you, Chair Ohilski. Yeah, this would be a relatively brief update, but we wanted to take the opportunity to share some of the early findings from the 2020 lower aquifer groundwater monitoring program. And so what we've provided in your packet is a graph, if we move to the next slide, that shows the updated chloride and water level metrics that incorporate the data from the spring 2020 monitoring program. And what we see from those metrics is that, unfortunately, there was an increase in the chloride metric from fall 2019 to spring of 2020, as shown at the end there. But there was not an associated decrease in the water level metric, which is good news. The water level metric basically stayed relatively stable. And then additionally included in the agenda packet is all the detailed water quality results for the lower aquifer wells. But we wanted to provide this data for informational purposes. There's a lot of interest on and how the basin is faring, and what are the metrics looking like. This data will get incorporated into the final annual report and include some additional analysis. But I can just state that I was able to have a brief conversation with Spencer Harris, the Los Osos BMC hydrogeologist, and there weren't any necessarily sampling anomalies or anything that attributed to this. This was just an observed increase in the chloride concentrations in the wells that are part of the chloride metric.
Sorry, I muted myself. I didn't realize I was. So any comments from the commission?
I have one comment. This is Mark Zimmer. So just looking at the uptick and trying to look at the actual analysis results, I know we recently added our lupine well into the results, and I see that chloride level is significant. And then when I look at the two sampling points from the fall of 2019 and then the spring, there's quite a bit of increase there. Any thought or any discussion with Spencer on why that's increased? And could that be the reason, since we're now including this high level result, could that be one of the reasons why we're seeing an uptick in these recent years? And then the second part of it is how we evaluate the Rosina well for Golden State. That one also seems to have a higher level to it. It's weighted as twice. So one of my conclusions, I don't fully understand it. It was just something that I observed. So maybe a good idea to revisit or reevaluate the chloride metric and how it's calculated, because to see an uptick like this is concerning, but it might just be in the reporting or the recording of the data and be able to be justified in that regard, instead of the fact that this kind of leads that the chloride front is moving or reverting back on land. So maybe worth it to go back and relook at, try to come up with a conclusion of why we're seeing this uptick. My two just overview would be the lupine zone E and then the Golden State Rosina well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for your questions. I think there's something that needs to be looked at, and probably Dan can communicate that to Spencer and then get an answer back for us.
Well, yeah, and this is Bruce. I second Mark's questions there, and I do note in our implementation plan there is a line to reevaluate the chloride metric and make sure that we're doing solid work there. You think about it, we're trying to distill basically a three-dimensional phenomenon into a single scalar number here, and I know there are different weightings. It's been a long time since it's been explained exactly to me, but I do think that it's a valuable exercise to be sure we have a metric that accurately and fairly assesses the overall state of seawater intrusion. And I agree, the addition of lupin might be part of that. And I'll look forward to another discussion of the details on this.
Yeah, again, I think, Dan, that's a discussion you need to have with Spencer to provide him with the questions and then the responses. So does anybody else have any comments before we go to public comment?
This is Dan Heimel, Executive Director. I can address some of those questions and agree. Spencer is really the expert here, and getting him engaged would be helpful. But the one question about the lupine well and that possibly contributing, I don't believe that is the case. While the lupine well is a new data point that we have available to us, and that is very beneficial, and it gives us data on both lower aquifer zone D and E. I do not believe that the water quality from that well is incorporated into the chloride metric. It is part of the program, and it's included in the database of data, but the wells that are included in the metric are 12J1, 13J1, which is the Rosina well, which is double counted, 13N and 7Q3. But I do agree with the directors Gibson and Zimmer that it warrants a reevaluation of the chloride metric, both just to understand what we're seeing, but also to determine is this the best metric for us to be utilizing given our current understanding of the basin, and also the fact that we now have a new well that we could incorporate into the metric and get a more comprehensive and hopefully a better picture of how seawater intrusion could occur within the basin.
Thank you, Dan. That was very, very productive and helpful comments, I believe. So,
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
all right, so let's go to public comment, Laura.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. There's no public comment at this time.
Okay, so on this item 6A, we don't have any any action required. So we just received the update and provided some questions to Dan for consideration at our next meeting. So with that, then we'll move to 6B, which is the implementation plan and the budget authorization. The recommendation is to review and provide direction on the proposed approach for preparing an implementation plan for the BMC, and provide authorization for staff to utilize additional budget to complete the implementation plan development or provide alternate direction to staff. So Dan, it's in your court again.
Thank you, Chair Ohilsky. Just a little bit of background for those that may not have been participating or listening in on the last series of BMC meetings, but the concept of the implementation plan was really born out of the calendar year 2020 BMC budget development process. And as we went through that process, we identified that there wasn't necessarily clear consensus on where the BMC should be focusing its efforts and limited available funding in order to advance basin plan and other BMC related initiatives. And so the concept of an implementation plan was developed, And if we go to the next slide, Laura, I can just provide a brief overview of the approach that's proposed as part of the implementation plan. First, we're going to document the roles and responsibilities of the BMC just through review of the stipulated judgment basin plan, and rules and regulations, and pulling out the key information from those formational documents about the roles and responsibilities of the BMC. From there, or really in parallel with that, the approach has been to work with the BMC party staff to develop a comprehensive, or as comprehensive as we can make it, list of potential BMC strategic initiatives. And we'll cover that in a second. Then at a high level, those initiatives will be scored and ranked using an agreed upon set of scoring criteria in an effort to help the BMC identify what initiatives it should prioritize for moving forward, and then develop its future budgets accordingly. And then ultimately that would be documented in a technical memorandum. So at the last, the June BMC meeting, the direction from the board was to initiate just a couple of the first steps towards the implementation plan. And so that included the review of the formational documents and the development of the list of strategic initiatives and scoring criteria. But then to come back to the BMC for review and approval of those initial steps, and also for consideration of authorization of additional budget that would be required to complete the full implementation plan. So if we move, I think 2 slides down, what I've included in here, and it's additionally included in the agenda packet, is just the list of strategic, and this is actually just part of the list of the strategic initiatives that were identified by the BMC party staff and directors, and provided to the executive director for compilation. And as you can see, there are a number of different strategic initiatives potentially available to the BMC, and we've looked to categorize them. And so I'll run through the categories, probably hold off on reading each individual initiative, but obviously available to discuss and answer questions about individual initiatives as the directors or public has questions. But we have a recycled water category, and this speaks to, I think, some of the earlier discussion. What's the best use of recycled water? There are currently 3 options available to the county for disposal or discharge of that recycled water, and so and then there are potentially future options in the creek discharge program. Another category is conservation. Conservation is obviously always a good option and considered the low-hanging fruit for improving water supply reliability. Then there's a category of new water supplies that consists of potential interties or enhanced capture of water that falls in the Los Osos Basin that may not, or in the surrounding areas that may not be currently making it down into the groundwater aquifers. Additional category is enhanced groundwater utilization, and this could come in a number of forms, including existing basin programs with Program C and Program D expansion wells, and as well as Program B, enhancing our utilization of the groundwater basin through the construction of a community nitrate facility. Growth accommodation. And so one thing that we're going to be working on as staff, if approved to move forward, is sort of categorizing these, because there's a lot of initiatives here, and some of them are sort of a planning level initiative, and others are a very significant infrastructure project. And so we want to be able to categorize them further so that we can be comparing apples to apples as we go through the scoring and ranking exercise. But we have growth accommodation, includes growth allowance criteria, and then funding and organizational studies, which we'll talk about in a later item. And then monitoring and metrics, again, speaks to some of the direction that we received on the last item. I think we really have an opportunity with the lupine monitoring well and our improved understanding to reevaluate a number of our different metrics, including the water level and chloride metrics. But there are also a number of other monitoring opportunities that could improve management of the basin, including monitoring well modifications to get better monitoring data for our monitoring program, or metering projects, or just a number of different options under the monitoring and metrics category. Then we move to the next slide. We have a category of modeling and analysis. So different initiatives that could be done to improve our understanding through additional modeling or hydrogeologic analysis exercises. And so there's a number of options there as well. And these kind of fall into that planning study category as well. And then finally, a couple of water quality initiatives that were proposed that could be considered by the BMC as a priority moving forward. So that's that overall list of proposed strategic initiatives. Definitely would love to receive input from the board of directors on this list, and anything that might be missing from this list. But I'll keep moving through the presentation before we go back to director comments. So we move to the next slide. The other thing that the BMC party staff developed was a proposed list of strategic initiative scoring criteria. And again, we've tried to categorize the different criteria. One of the big ones in any supplemental project, or any project for that matter, is cost. And so looking at scoring them relative to capital costs, which is envisioned as like, what's the cost of the infrastructure to make that initiative work? Water cost, what would be the cost of water to make for that initiative? That really applies to sort of the intertie or other specific initiatives. And then O&M costs. What are the ongoing costs to operate and maintain some of the different water infrastructure projects that are included in the strategic initiatives list? Then there's some supply demand scoring criteria. Does it provide more supply? Who does it benefit? Or does it reduce demand? Water quality scoring criteria proposed related to nitrates and other pollutants, as well as seawater intrusion. And then feasibility complexity. There are a number of criteria here, and these are, I think, very important in terms of both governance as well as permittability, timelines. Another one is, does it fit within the existing stipulated judgment, or is it legally required by the stipulating judgment? So a number of different scoring criteria here that I think will be beneficial in evaluating the different initiatives. And then finally, a monitoring and management category is, does that initiative improve water resource accounting? And so that's the list of the initiatives. And then recently, as I described, sort of the criteria that will be utilized to evaluate the different initiatives. And so if we move to the next slide, just to outline the remaining tasks. So what we have in front of us to complete the implementation plan is the roles and responsibilities documentation. We've pulled what we feel are the relevant clauses and sections from the formational documents, but we really want to summarize that in a way that makes it much more accessible to a reader of the implementation plan, as opposed to the 6 pages of excerpts that we currently have. And then for the strategic initiative evaluation, we need to potentially refine the list, look for opportunities to consolidate the different initiatives. I think there's somewhere around 35 right now. It'd be great if we could consolidate some of those in a way that just makes it easier to go through the scoring and ranking exercise, and easier for those reviewing the plan to follow and understand. What's also proposed is development of summary sheets for the different initiatives to help really improve everybody's understanding of what each of those initiatives means. At this point, they're somewhat, what you saw in that previous table is the full extent of their description. And, you know, I think those that have been active in the Los Osos Basin and involved in a lot of conversations kind of have an understanding of what that means, but there are those that may not. And so if we can put together a more lengthy description of the different initiatives, I think that's really going to help A, everybody understand what the initiative is, and also B, help us have consistent scoring. Because if we each have a different understanding of what that means, then we're going to score it differently. And we want to be able to get as consistent of a scoring exercise as we can. Then additional step is developing the framework. So taking that scoring criteria and splitting it up. We want to have a systematic approach. So, you know, an example would be under sort of increases potable supply, for example. You'd want to put together a range. So if it increases potable supply by 100 acre feet, it gets a score of 1. If it increases potable supply by 500 acre feet, it gets a score of 4. And so that way you can have a consistent scoring when you're working through the different alternatives. And then finally, documentation. Well, actually, sorry, I skipped a step. The actual scoring and ranking exercise. That will take some time and really require a lot of collaboration from the BMC party staff and or directors, depending on how we want to approach it. But going through each initiative and the scoring criteria and applying a score and working through that process, and then analyzing the results and see what comes out of that scoring and ranking process and how does it help inform and guide the future actions of the BMC. And then finally, the last step is the development of the documentation for the implementation plan is in the form of a technical memorandum as currently proposed. So with those remaining tasks, I've put together an estimate of hours and budget that would be required to work through those tasks for the executive director. I've also proposed to engage Spencer Harris with Cleith Harris Geologists in that process. As many of you know, Spencer has a long history and one of the most comprehensive understandings of the Los Osos groundwater basin and the projects and programs both in the basin plan and that have been evaluated and identified since then. And so I think it would be really beneficial to have him engaged in the implementation plan development process. So that based on the level of effort for both of those items, we're estimating about 19,000 of additional budget that would be required. And for comparison, I compiled some information on our current budget for the BMC, and we currently have about 16,000 in remaining contingency funds. And then I'm anticipating some unspent funds for a couple of items that likely won't occur between now and the end of the calendar year. One of those is grant writing, and I'm reluctant to offer that up because if there's a grant opportunity, you always want to be ready to do it. But I'm currently not aware of any grant opportunities that are going to arise, you know, between now and the end of the year that we're going to need to respond to. Another potential bucket would be, you know, unfortunately as a side effect, or fortunately as a side effect, I guess, of not being able to meet in person, we are saving money on rent for the BMC meetings and the audio visual video expenses associated with taping and broadcasting those meetings. So that concludes my report on the implementation plan and the budget authorization request, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dan. So do we have some questions before we go to public comment, please?
This is Bruce. Let me just confirm, and maybe it's just helpful for the public, that the matter of scoring each of these individual initiatives is really to establish a priority or a work plan. Is that a fair way to put it, Dan?
It is, yeah. I think that's a great way to put it, and that's why I think we're trying to use the nomenclature implementation plan. This is going to help us identify a plan so that we can move forward and implement initiatives, and it should tie into the future. And I may not have mentioned that the BMC budgeting process. You know, really the goal is to sort of develop this work plan or implementation plan that lays out tasks in time, and then allows us to then evaluate available budgets and put money in time out there so that we can be more proactive and hopefully more successful in moving these initiatives, the prioritized initiatives, forward.
Get our to-do list together. You know, I think all the way it's framed up, I think works really well. I would say that in scoring these, there's one other aspect that occurred to me while you were talking, and that is whether a particular initiative serves as a condition precedent to other projects down the line. Namely, do we need to complete a certain task in order to facilitate others that are on the list? And so that should help order our thinking on that as well.
Yeah, that's good input. I'll add that to the list.
Yeah, this is Cody at S&T. I really think that this is important, what you're doing here, Dan, and the staff is doing, that this is creating a more organized way for us to think about projects and tasks. I have another additional question, comment here about budgeting, and you have mentioned this a couple of times, and you hinted at it here about unspent budgeted funds in 2020. S&T is going to get together in October at our October meeting and approve a budget for 2021. One of the things that I'd be able to do, perhaps, is try to convince our board to carry over unspent budgeted funds for the Basin Management Committee. This is probably more appropriate to talking about in a staff meeting, but we're coming up on a time on the calendar soon for a couple of the 4 entities here where we're going to be talking about end of year or budgeting for the coming year. And I think it's not too soon to be trying to think about mechanisms for how we can manage that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. So let's go to public comment then, Laura, please.
Marshall, I have this is Mark Zimmer. I have a comment I'd like to just throw out there too. And I think this is a important work and initiative. One of the things that when I was reading through it appears this is kind of grown in proportion of what we were originally talking about in both cost and complexity, at least much more than I intended it to be. And it's taking, you know, the amount of time that we have listed of Dan, and then it's also going to require staff time is more than expected. You know, what I would like to propose is that we pare this down and take it in incremental chunks of task and just make sure, you know, let's test drive this approach instead of going all in on this proposal. The way it's written today is we start with some of the objectives and then we come back and we look at it and is this what we're intending to be? And one of the reasons why I've come to this conclusion is the strategic initiatives in that laundry list was really just a bucket list of thoughts that were put together by the various purveyors and the county of what would optimize, what's our optimization of projects that we could have out there. Some of these projects, it may not be the right time. There, you know, as I think Bruce mentioned, that, you know, things may need to come before others and things like that. But what I would like to do is not approve the entire project the way it stands today, but take more of think through the projects and analyze the scoring criteria be a little more judicious and thoughtful and focusing in on the analysis and what's important today. You know, what has potential. We're going to talk about AB 1600. I think that's a critical component of how we evaluate the projects and their viability. Is are we going to be able to pay for them? So, you know, I think not recommending that today, coming up with a more manageable approach of a half a dozen projects or so that we've been talking about, and you know, test drive this approach. It would also reduce the cost of what we're proposing to do here. I see a lot of time, you know, you look at the 40 hours and the roles and responsibilities, implementation plan. You know, I would like to understand more of the meat of the strategic initiatives in the evaluation before we get into having a plan in place, because we may be able to steer that and guide it in the way that we want it to go, based on some of the findings that we have. So I think that there's a way to pare this down. When we look at some of the criteria, there's just no way that some of these may or be warranted at this time, and spending money and time on them. I'd like to propose that we reevaluate this and talk a little bit more about paring it down and understanding it a little bit better.
Could I respond to that, Marshall? It's Bruce.
Yes.
Yeah, Mark. I mean, I get it. We can't do everything, but I think that's a job for the staff level meetings to take on, and I think that what Dan has put out here, you know, laundry list, yes, perhaps you can call it that, but it's got, you know, the wide variety of things that are potentially useful for managing this basin. And so what I'd like to do is let the scoring process sort that out. And, you know, if any of the participants of the in the process feel strongly that certain of these things should be put so far down the list, you know, as to not be in active consideration, I think that's a perfectly reasonable result. I mean, I look at it, I see one or two that I would put a very low priority on, and this is after county staff has looked these over and given me some preliminary thoughts. But I think it's wise to start with the widest possible set of potential initiatives, and let the reality of cost and time and benefit guide us in that. And I think that it's wise for us to have at this right now. And I totally agree that some, if not many, of these ideas are going to get pushed down. I think the other thing is, while we see a lot of lines here, not all of them are by any means of the same order of magnitude in terms of amount of effort that they're going to take. And so let that get sorted out. Prioritizing is a challenging process, but I would, our county staff is fine with using the budget items identified to start doing exactly what you want to do. I think it's better that we let staff give us a cut at that, and in the end, it's the representatives of this committee that'll make the final decision.
Thank you, Bruce.
Sorry, I was on remote. If I could just comment back, and I agree with taking a look at the list the way it is, but what I was kind of alluding to is the fact that we have a look at that list once some of those initiatives are evaluated, before moving into just looking at the cost of the technical memorandum, item 3. that's over half the cost of the project. So why would we, I don't think it would be prudent to write a memo on items that we don't foresee moving forward now or even in the near future. We can keep them as, I think all these initiatives are things that we need to continue talking about, and maybe they stay on the list. But what I would like to see happen is not commit to $19,000 and the full-blown task as it's written here before us today, is to modify that and take it in steps, because I think we can reduce this cost and we can minimize the amount of burden on Dan to do this work, and staff time to do this work, by focusing, looking at the initial list, tailoring it down, and focusing in on the tasks that we agree as a board to look at.
I wonder if Dan could respond as to whether there could be a phased approach to proceeding through what he's recommending here.
Yeah, I think, Bruce, that's a good question, because I don't think just because we're doing the budget authorization that we don't have to say we're going to entirely or spend that entire amount, that's the amount available under what, in response to Mark's comments, under the worst case scenario. So Dan, could you maybe talk about Mark's comments and see how those could be addressed in your meeting with staff or with Spencer or however?
I can, yes. Couple of thoughts there. I think probably the first and easiest one is, if we want to defer the authorization for the TM to a future decision point and really decide whether or not we need a TM. If we work through the earlier steps in the exercise and decide that that's sufficient documentation for the BMC, then that's a task item that could easily come out of this and save time and money. So that's definitely one option. Actually, if we go to the next slide, Laura, I put together sort of a schedule for how I envision this moving forward. And so, we're here today on August 26th. The next steps would be the roles and responsibilities, the strategic initiative summary sheets, and then the scoring and ranking framework development. And then the meat of the exercise is in late September, early October, is this strategic initiative scoring and ranking. And then coming back to the BMC at our October meeting with the results of that evaluation. And so that could be a decision point to decide, we've gone through this evaluation, these are our findings, and where do we need to go from here? Do we need to move forward with a technical memorandum, or is this sufficient to, as it's documented in, a staff report to the BMC, to allow us to get the benefit out of this initiative and to move forward, hopefully, with an agreed upon set of prioritized initiatives. So that's one comment. And then I guess the other comment about paring it down, I guess in my opinion, I think this is probably going to be one of the most cost-effective ways to pare this down. Short of just sort of, arbitrarily saying, well, these initiatives don't really fit, or these initiatives, and not, it doesn't need to be arbitrary. I guess I should say we could establish some criteria that, like, any project that's going to take longer than 5 years, we just want to defer. But I think as Director Zimmer, identified, that's not really where the meat of the cost and the effort is. That writing it up at the end takes a lot of the effort. And so I think we can pretty efficiently work through all these initiatives, and there's probably some consolidation opportunities as well. But, I think that really the value is in the scoring and ranking component of it. And so I guess I would recommend that we focus on that. That'll help us prioritize them. And then I'm sure we'll have numerous discussions moving forward on how we lay out those prioritized initiatives in time.
Dan, so thank you for that response.
Thank you, Dan. That's very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Would it be safe to say, or would it be a suggestion that we do those approve funding for those first three timeline and portions of the project, we hold off on the actual scoring and ranking until our October meeting, come back and authorize that scoring and ranking at that point, after we have another look at it during our October meeting, and then move forward in this type of sequential steps. I would feel more comfortable with that type of an approach.
Yeah, I guess I was proposing a slightly different approach, in that we would move forward with the scoring and ranking and have the preliminary results of that. These would just be sort of staff level recommendations or results, scoring and ranking evaluation, and have those available at the October meeting, and then but defer authorization of the technical memorandum portion of the implementation plan till that point, and then at that point decide whether we even needed to move forward with that component of it, the TM.
Or based on what we see at the October meeting, to get a final decision by the members of this committee that is indeed the scoring and ranking that we concur with as a whole, and sets the priorities, and then we decide how much more writing up, same thing as Dan said, we can decide what more documentation we need to finalize that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's consistent, Mark, with what you were hoping to achieve.
Yeah, I think doing this incremental approach makes a lot of sense. And then I think the scoring part of it will allow us at our December meeting to make a substantive decision on the path forward from that point.
Yeah, this is Mark again. I just think that scoring an initiative, it's a big chunk of the project, 25% of the hours. And if it, we may not need that based on the initiative summary sheets and the criteria framework. Some of that work may be eliminated. Just not, I guess I'm struggling on the timing, if we have a critical timeline for this, or can we take our time and do it right and come up with a end product that's as efficient and cost effective as possible.
Well, yeah, I appreciate your comments, Mark. So let's let everybody mull that over, go to public comment, and then we can finish our discussion after public comment. Laura?
Yep. If you would like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. If you're on your computer, please raise your hand. Jeff, you're able to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. Again, my name is Jeff Edwards. And if you recall at your June meeting, I expressed concerns about the complexity, the staff time and cost, and then ultimately when the work product would become available for informational purposes. The need is understood. We're past 5 years that the Basin Management Committee's been meeting. It probably would be timely for a reset and reestablish priorities. And also it'd probably be good to help inform the further debate on AB 1600 and how we're going to allocate costs for new development. But with that said, we're not the Metropolitan Water Department. This is a small basin in a small community with limited resources. And I think to the greatest extent possible, we need to keep this simple. The proposed strategic initiatives, the list, is a good start, but it looks like staff may have jumped the gun in preparing the documented goals and responsibilities of the BMC, this 7-page item. It looks like that's the 8 hours that was referred to in the budget for roles and responsibility documentation 1A. Maybe that 8 hours has already been spent. The scoring framework and so forth, I think is overly complex. Let's keep this simple. there's just a handful of projects that are short-term and require funding. We're not talking about tens of millions of dollars. We're talking something on the order of $10 million to fulfill the remaining programs. So I think this should be done. In fact, I don't recommend any of what's been proposed. Let's take the list right now, the proposed implementation plan and strategic initiatives list. Your committee right now can pare it down to what you think are the most important items, and then let's send staff out to come back in October with a modified, simplified scoring system, and let's start putting a number to these. The Tausig and Associates study is in the packet. That's a good basis to begin putting numbers on projects so that it will inform the AB 1600 analysis. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Laura, do we have anybody else?
We do. Lindy, you're able to speak.
Hi again, Lindy Owen, and I appreciate Dan and staff's the task planning presentation. I would agree that maybe simplifying it down is a possibility. There's so much work that's been done already. And as far as the Harris-Cleath agreement to spend $19,000, I think it should be up to $19,000 without just making a contract that says that you know ahead of time how much time will be spent on this project, because I don't think you do exactly. And then I think that I saw something that I do not see either in the new water supplies, might be where it would land, or in the enhanced groundwater utilization, the fact that the county is mandated to use that recycled water to offset ag use. If we want new water, we are not going to get it from the rainfall. I think we're going to get it by offsetting the ground pumping that some of the larger ag groups are using. And that's a mandate from the Coastal Commission for approval of the basin, the sewer plant. So I would like to see that brought back in, because it is the county's mandate, and to date, there's been nothing done. That was going to be a huge offset of pumping, was to provide the recycled water to the ag community. And I think that's still a goal. And I don't know where the county stands at this, but apparently they're doing not much. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Lindy. Anybody else, Laura?
There's no other public comment at this time.
Okay, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the committee.
Marshall, this is Bruce. Let me suggest a path forward that might meet Mark's and everybody's approach here. Let me
Okay,
first
go
ask
ahead.
Dan, we are planning a September meeting, correct?
We were not, no.
Well, what if we did and did the following and set this up as a rough screening, fine screening approach, as we did with the options for the wastewater plant? You know, I would suggest that we could direct staff to go forward, finalize the roles and responsibilities summary, and I have a couple of small additions to that, and to take and to do whatever they think appropriate in terms of developing summary sheets for each of these initiatives, but also then to take a rough screening of those with direction from this committee that there are certain of these projects that may be, because of their extended timeline, things that we are not going to get too detailed in looking at right now. Bring that rough screening back in September at some point, and have us confirm that what's on that winnowed list is worthy of a more detailed scoring and ranking, and have staff work on that between September and the October meeting. At the October meeting, we would then approve the the more detailed ranking of, let's call them the viable projects, and decide how much more documentation, whether it's good or whether we need some kind of technical memo, should be written up at that point. And I think that gets the sorting out done that Mark's interested in. I think it also gets the careful attention to priorities with some kind of rational screening and ranking approach. And in the end, we make it happen on this timeline, and ask staff to do it. I think it's a fruitless. I think it's just an inefficient process for us to try to hash it out here, especially not in person.
Well, Bruce, I think if I could piggyback on what you're saying, and I think what I would suggest is that we could have basically a study session in September, so we could discuss this, on a more informal basis and get input from the various members as well as the staff members.
Well, no, I'd like our staffs to be giving us a proposal of viable projects in September. If winnowing this list, which I agree, there's a lot to do here, but let us put it on staff operating in appropriate meetings in the interim between now and a September date. Give us a proposal. I think that would help guide this committee's understanding. Each participant in the BMC would have its input through the staff, and we'll come back with a winnowed list in September to see what we want to do about more detailed analysis of the priorities of what's on the what the surviving list looks like.
Well, Bruce, I just don't think having 3 weeks to do that is a realistic thing. That's my concern.
Well, we're on an ambitious timeline here. I think it sets us up well to be ready to start doing things in 2021. Well,
okay, so what we could do then is set a meeting for our normal hearing date, which would be September 16th, but have the sole item on the agenda, this particular item. How's that?
That sounds reasonable.
I think we should ask, this is Mark Zimmer, I think we should ask Dan if that fits his schedule to have something like that ready to go at the September meeting. Because I appreciate that, Bruce. I think that's a great approach and a great compromise there. So I appreciate your input. I guess I would leave it up to Dan to comment if his schedule can accommodate that recommendation.
Yeah, I think with the modified approach, that's definitely an achievable plan. I guess a couple of recommendations I would make. Maybe we defer the roles and responsibilities summary and really focus on the strategic initiatives.
Yep.
And maybe we sort of cut down on the summary sheets a bit and just limit it to, enough information, to at least convey the gist of what type of project it is.
Sounds very good.
And then, we can, I guess I would, and then in the rough screening, I think I can work with BMC staff to sort of identify, what is the appropriate criteria that allows us to potentially defer an initiative for some future evaluation. My concern is just, I don't want to arbitrarily necessarily be screening things out from the larger thing. But if there are obviously criteria that are logical and really allow us to focus our efforts moving forward that are justifiable, I think there's an opportunity to consolidate and reduce the size of the strategic initiatives list.
Okay. So Mark Zimmer here. Dan, do you think that trying to come up with a way to motion this and give you approval to move forward, if we authorized, say 20 hours of time to work on the first 3 tasks as outlined in your proposed schedule, that would get us to the point you mentioned with consideration on modifying the summary sheets, and the initiatives, and modifying some of the scoring. Because even if we modify the scoring, if it comes back before us, we could have you relook at that and bring it back, as a higher priority. But at least modifying it to your expertise and authorizing, say, 20 hours worth of your time to work on those first 3 items. Would that be something that would fit into what you just described?
Yeah, I think so. Basically, if we're looking at the staff report, so keeping in a modified fashion items of the remaining tasks 2A, 2B, and 2C. If I think I'm hearing it correctly. Refine the list, reduced summary sheets, and start populating a scoring criteria framework.
Yeah.
Okay.
Second.
That makes sense to me. So does anybody have any problems with going forward with that approach?
Nope.
All right, Dan, I
Good.
think you got good direction from the members here to move forward. And then what we'll do is we'll schedule a special meeting basically for September 16th with the sole item on the agenda, the discussion of this.
Do we need to make an official motion?
I don't think so. We're just giving direction to staff. Or are we approving the budget? We're not approving the budget adjustment at this point, are we?
We're authorizing some work.
Yeah, I guess I mean, there's currently, remaining budget obviously for the executive director services, at, I guess, just anticipating, if we take on this additional work, there may be a need to authorize additional budget at the end of the year, but that's something we could defer, until that point. But it wouldn't be beyond the 20 hours that would have been authorized as part of this direction.
So do you want to, so should we move the 20, agree to the 20 hours or just hold off till the September? That's what I don't know the answer.
I think we're good. Well,
Why don't we take, why don't we take Dan's estimate of 20 hours as acceptable? And, and then we can formalize it when we see what's ahead of us when we meet in September.
Okay, why don't we make a motion then to authorize up to 20 hours and then,
So moved.
Second. Martin.
all right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, thank you, Dan. So we'll move on to 6C.
And Mr. Chairman, just for your reference, I have a hard stop at 3:30. I'm not sure how much time each of these other events are going to take, but just so you know.
Okay, all right. Well, we're moving to 6C, the AB 1600 funding study. The recommendation is review and provide description of an AB 1600 funding study and provide direction on staff on how to proceed. So Dan?
Thank you, Chair O'Hilsky. Yeah, so what I've provided for you today in the staff report is just a very high-level summary description of an AB 1600 study. And I wanted to bring this item to the BMC for discussion and consideration because of the ongoing related initiatives that it will impact, future growth and future water demand within the Los Osos community. So, as the community plan is going through the land use authority review and approval process through the County Planning Commission, Board of Supervisors, and then ultimately to the California Coastal Commission, I think it's important that the BMC has a comprehensive understanding of the options or mechanisms available to it for funding potential water infrastructure projects that could be required to accommodate future growth. I think a prime example of that is, from the Basin Plan, is programs B and D. And just a little of the history. In 2016, the BMC parties evaluated a number of different options for establishing a special task that would support basin plan implementation and BMC administrative costs. And that report is included in your agenda packet as referred to as the TOSIG report. One of the recommendations from that report was that as new develop resumes, or is potentially resumes, that the BMC consider evaluation of an AB 1600, or as described, a benefit area fee program. And so we go to the next slide. I just pulled some information on sort of the definitions of a AB or a 1600 or development impact fee. It's a monetary extraction other than a tax or special assessment that is charged by local government to an applicant in connection with approval of development project for the purposes of defraying all or a portion of the costs of the public facilities related to the development project. And so in this case, we're really talking about the cost of water infrastructure that could be required to provide sustainable water supply for future growth. And so I think this could be a potential valuable tool in improving the BMC's understanding, as it relates to the implementation plan. Through the implementation plan process, the goal is to review and identify the key priority strategic initiatives to help implement the basin plan and improve water supply sustainability in the community. And one of those mechanisms that really, to my knowledge, hasn't been studied in detail is an AB 1600 study or the implementation of a development impact fee. And so depending on the timing that the BMC wants to have, these two initiatives, the implementation plan and then an AB 1600 study, could be done in series, in which we finish the implementation plan and then would embark on an AB 1600 study. Alternatively, we could initiate an AB 1600 study now, so that as we wrap up the implementation plan or shortly thereafter, we have information available to us on what is one of the other potential funding mechanisms for future potentially required infrastructure projects. And so I wanted to just bring this item to the BMC's attention or for consideration and discussion. It was originally included, and I think it was not necessarily described as explicitly, but I think envisioned by the previous executive director under a budget item called funding an organizational study that was proposed in the preliminary or proposed calendar year 2020 budget. That budget had an estimate of about $40,000 to do the funding and organizational study, of which I think it was envisioned that the AB 1600 study would be a part of that. I think there's potentially an opportunity to sort of better define the scope of work for an AB 1600 study and hopefully have an associated reduction in cost of such a study. And so I wanted to bring that for consideration. There are a number of options available to the BMC regarding to this. There's not necessarily an explicit recommendation, but looking for direction for the BMC on this. And I guess probably a little bit of additional background that might be helpful for the discussion is, there's sort of a calculation component of this that, looks at potential future growth rates and the magnitude of an impact fee and how much revenue that a fee could generate over time, and then how that could be utilized to fund infrastructure projects. And so that's really just some calculations that can be done by specialized consultants that do this stuff all the time very efficiently. The other component of this is, through discussions with the BMC staff, I think there continue to be a number of questions about, just some of the specific mechanisms for how an AB 1600 fee or development impact fee could be levied. What parties are eligible to, say, levy that fee, and then how could those funds be transferred to a governance organization that could then implement projects. And so one potential scope for a study could be looking at the calculations associated with revenue that you would generate from an AB 1600 study, but then also a component that looks at and hopefully helps address some of the governance questions that I think that the BMC parties have for moving implementation projects forward. And that concludes my report for this item.
Okay, comments by the board members, please?
Yeah, this is Mark. I have a comment, just generally speaking, about the scope. So right now, are you, there's a $40,000 price tag out there. Are we proposing to fund $40,000, or are we kind of just getting a little bit of direction on how do we want to move with this study? I think one of the key things to understand is who is eligible to be the steward of it. Would that reside in the county, and is the county willing to do that, or could that be through the BMC and managed through the BMC with a form of governance in place to allow us to do that? I think my thought originally is just understanding that is this even feasible for us to invest in a study for AB 1600, and then a follow-up or secondary question to that is how much detail do we need regarding specific projects to develop a development impact fee. I heard that we were going to potentially be able to use some of the work of our initiative planning, but I'm not sure exactly what projects the funding could be used for and things like that. So I think, the first step would really be the governance of the scope of work and understanding, is this even feasible for us to do? And then look at, the next step and having a consultant come in and really analyze and look at the calculations and the projects and coming up with the mechanism or what we actually need to move forward with implementing the AB 1600 process.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Anybody else have other comments before we go to public comment?
I think that what Mark's asking about is something that the study can take on. Why don't we get public comment if we have it, and I'll let me go into that in deliberation.
Okay.
This is Cody at S&T. I completely agree with Mark Zimmer that the BMC, the way it exists right now, can't have a bank account. And I mean, it's as simple as that. The county could manage something like this, or possibly the CSD under the authority of the Basin Management Committee, but I doubt they'd be willing to do that. There's some significant questions, preliminary questions, and I think that's what Mark was getting at here, that must be answered before we can really very seriously consider this.
Right. Okay, let's go to public comment. Laura?
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. If you're on your computer, please raise your hand. All right, Jeff, you're able to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. My name is Jeff Edwards, and regarding this AB 1600 funding study, I would offer the following comments. One, first, wait for the strategic initiatives to be completed. before you commence on further analysis of the funding study. I think it should be done sequentially and not in parallel. With the strategic implementation priorities, I think you're going to be in a much better position to complete the analysis under the AB 1600 provisions. And secondly, I think you can take the DTA 2016 plan and have staff internally refine that and basically bring it up to current facts and current situation. So again, I think we can do a lot of this work. I don't think we need to hire a consultant to do this work. Thirdly, we continue to try to identify specific projects that are going to be earmarked for new development. And I think that's inherently problematic. While we want to try our best to identify how projects and their cost can be allocated appropriately, I think it's nearly impossible to do it where you have projects that are specifically again earmarked for new growth or development. And for example, I heard that programs B and D were new growth projects or new growth programs, and that's simply not the case. There may never be a program D well. There may never be another program B well, and I'll speak about the program B a little later in the last agenda item. But these are projects that may never happen. So I think we need to take the list of our priorities and then review them and look at them individually. I'll add also that in terms of sewer service, what's being contemplated is an impact fee right around $20,000 per single family residence. And I would see a water impact fee right in that same vicinity for new single families. So this isn't rocket science. It's been done before. And I'll just conclude by saying that in terms of governance, the Basin Management Committee, your committee, does not implement basin plan programs. Those are done by purveyors and others. You guide implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Laura, anybody else?
Yes, Lindy, you're able to speak.
Hello again, Lindy. And I think I see the development of the impact fee as a little premature. And I think that it really comes back to working through what the county's plans are. The proposal that's going forward with, I guess it's between the growth management and the community plan approvals and continuing discussions, are the fact that the proposal from the county is that they could start in the first year, once the goals are met to get the new wells, et cetera, in, is to begin with 81 homes per year. What I understand is that this basin management is number one's goal is to guarantee and produce that we can produce a sustainable water supply to serve the current users. The second item would be to take on how many new growth developments we want to be looking at in a reasonable fashion to remain sustainable. And so someplace in there, you're going to be able to come up with the costs for the additional growth that we may see in the future. I believe it's under the growth management plan, low-income housing is exempt from requiring any kind of water offset. That is problematic in one way, but in another way, since we probably won't get any, maybe that's not an issue. There's a current list at the county, property owners that are already on a list, and the county has not really clarified if these are all large single-family homes or if there's any kind of breakdown to providing the affordable housing that we as a community would like to see have priority. So I think there's got to be some marriage between what the county's approval for new development is beginning to look like, and then come back and take a look at what these fees for the additional growth costs would be after we find out what is our sustainable yield for existing people. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but the county issues the permits for the new growth. So it kind of comes back to having that conversation, I believe, with the county to see how they're going to be planning this. So anyway, I hope that that helped clarify my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy. Yes, it did. I think. So any other further comment, Laura?
There's no other public comment at this time.
Okay, so let's bring it back to the board here. It seems like what I'm hearing is we may want to basically move this out rather than make a substantive recommendation today. Is that how everybody would like to proceed?
I'm comfortable with that. There are two, there are two pieces in dealing with these development impact fees. One of them is we need to understand exactly what, how much money we need to collect, which means we need to understand the projects that are going to serve new development. And the second thing is we need to understand the governance structure. And it's observed that right now the BMC can't accept these fees as an entity, but we're also talking about JPA, which I think as all this sort of solidifies, I think is starting to make a lot of sense in terms of how we coordinate the activities of four different entities. So, in consulting with my staff, they want to, they think that some of these studies should really focus on who, the how, the when are these development fees collected, and who are they going to go to. So we also have a bit of budget concern. If this all can get done for $40,000, great. As it gets larger, we're in, we got to talk about how even the study's going to be funded. But my feeling is we definitely need the study, because we need to have the system for funding the programs that are in our basin plan that are gonna handle what new development is going to come. So I think maybe we have some further staff discussion on this, and let's maybe agendize that for October for further discussion.
Yeah, I agree with Bruce. Mark, what do you and Charlie think?
Yeah, I think that's fine. If we could direct our staff to include it in their staff meeting and come back with more information. And, I think funding is just such a critical part of our discussions and projects, and we have to come up with a funding mechanism, and doing it sooner than later may be helpful. So I'd like to keep it alive, but also in agreement, bringing it back to the October meeting seems reasonable.
Okay, Charlie, what do you think?
I also agree that we should put this off a little bit and talk about it again.
All right, well, why don't we then give direction to staff to get together, talk about this, and then bring it back for a substantive discussion in our October meeting. Everybody in agreement with that?
Yes, in agreement.
Okay, so go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
You have to leave. I know you have to leave, so
I was just going to say thank you. I'm going to go ahead and, for the last item, vacate my chair and turn it over to my alternate, Kate Ballantyne. She's in the attendees list right now. She was working on getting her computer audio going so she could be part of the full discussion of the committee.
Yep, I see her on the attendees list. Yep.
And with that, thank you all, and I'll look forward to talking with you in September, if not before.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks.
Hi, Kate. Can you hear us? Kate? I see you're here.
It doesn't look like her audio is connected at the moment.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's move on to then the last substantive item on the agenda, item 6D, update on the status of the Basin Plan infrastructure projects. The staff recommendation is to receive the report and provide input to staff on future direction. So, Dan, Kate, can you hear us now? Okay.
Yes, I can now hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Okay. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, Dan, we're turning over 6D to you. Let's go.
Thank you, Chair Ohilski. Yeah, item 6D. This is our basically our consistent update on the status of Basin Plan infrastructure projects. And similar to the Executive Director's report, included in the table, I've underlined any updates since our last status update. And so I've got two updates, well, three really to talk about. First, in Program A, we discussed a little bit earlier, but the grant funding for the equipping of the LOCSD well has been formally or received final approval from the Department of Water Resources, and so that they are moving forward with the agreements that are necessary to obtain that grant funding with an anticipated agreement execution date in spring of 2021, and then construction to be completed during the summer of 2021. And I believe that will constitute completion of Program A, or at least as how it's characterized in our status of Basin Plan update table. The other project I have an update on is the, again, LOCSD project. It's their Program C well. At our last meeting, we discussed how they had contracted with an environmental consulting firm to do an environmental constraints analysis of 5 potential Program C well sites. The update is that work has been completed, and the document will be submitted to the CSD at the end of August, and that they anticipate that item, that document, and the findings from that to go to the LOCSD Board of Directors in October. And then the other update is just regards to the S&T Golden State Water Interconnection. Currently, that project has been on hold. As what Director Cote has informed me, they've been very focused on their water meter cellular retrofit project. And I think, as we saw at the beginning of the meeting, quite a bit of work and effort has gone into that. And I see that they'll get a lot of value out of that. And but presumably the interconnection project can move forward as that project wraps up. So that is the update on the status of basin infrastructure or Basin Plan infrastructure projects.
Sorry. Okay, thank you, Dan. So questions before we go to public comment, please?
Yeah, this is Mark Zimmer. Just want to clarify, I think when we were looking at Program C well, we look at Program A well, will be completed there. Program C well, once we complete, S&T completes their well, we're going to be done with Program C projects also. We have this third expansion well out there, and it's been deferred. We should probably clarify that is gonna what is the status of that moving forward? Are we going to consider Program C to be completed, or are we going to keep that on the table? I guess is one of my questions for you, Dan.
A good question. Dan, should we defer that, or do you have an answer?
No, that is a good question. I don't know if I have exactly the answer Director Zimmer will be looking for, but so it's my understanding that through the adaptive management process, maybe in quotations, that third program C well has been deferred. However, I think based on discussions at a staff level, we don't necessarily as a BMC have a formal adaptive management process. And so I think there's been a request from county planning that the BMC develop a more formal process, because obviously, you know, the status of these programs has significant implications with respect to new growth or at least as it's characterized within the community plan. And so there is one of the strategic initiatives in the implementation plan is developing a more formal procedure for adaptive management. And so it's something that I think the BMC envisions needing to work on. So either as that comes through part of the implementation plan, or if there's direction from the directors that we want to move that item forward and prioritize it, that's definitely something that the BMC staff could work on and bring back to the board of directors.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Dan. Sorry, I was shifting through my papers to go back and look at our initiative study just to see if that was included, because one of my comments is that maybe it doesn't stay in program C. You know, we should probably look at that as part of our initiative study. And I was trying to sift back to see if that was on the list or not, but it may be a project that we want to evaluate, and maybe something that we could implement versus some of the other. Just it would be helpful to have that in the evaluation and criteria ranking as far as comparing it to other projects.
Yeah, I believe if it's under the monitoring and metrics category. The second to the last strategic initiative is formalize adaptive management procedures under the implementation plan proposed.
And then that part of it, and then also including a evaluation of the expansion well, not to leave that out, to evaluate that also.
Yes, I think we have that. I believe is included under the enhanced groundwater utilization category. The third item, program C expansion wells, is one of the proposed strategic initiatives, and then further defined as consideration of each well separately. So yeah, definitely it's on the list. It's just a question if whether or not that needs to be moved up or modified.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments before we go to public comment? Okay, seeing none, let's go, Laura, to public, please.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. If you're on your computer, please raise your hand. Jeff, you're able to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff Edwards on item 6D, and I wanted to make a couple clarifications or corrections. Under program D, sorry, strike that. Under program B, as in boy, the update on the status of basin plan infrastructure projects indicates that Golden State Water Company's Program A blending project might be capable of expanding to be the first phase of the Program B community, that's community-wide nitrate removal facility. And certainly Golden State can clarify, but my understanding is there's virtually no case where the Rosina and Fern Golden State Water Company facility could be used as a community, or in this instance, phase one of a larger plan under Program B. So I'd like to make that clarification. That language probably needs to be removed. The second thing I'd like to mention is that regarding the LOCSD's number 2 Program C well, there are, as far as I know, there are 4 candidate sites currently being reviewed, not 5. There were originally 6. And again, as I understand it, that list is down to 4 locations. So just for clarification. And that's all I had. Thank you.
There's no other public comment at this time.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, so we'll bring it back if we have any further discussion. Otherwise, we'll move on to item number 7. Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to public comments for items not appearing on the agenda. Laura?
If you'd like to make a public comment for an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand if you're on your computer or dial *9 if you're on your phone. Lindy, you're able to speak.
Hi again, Lindy Owen. I wanted to, in my public comment, see if I could hear any updates on the high nitrate readings that are near Sea Pines and Cabrillo. My reason is we've spent $200,000 on a sewer treatment plant to get rid of septic tank pollution causing nitrates. And if Cabrillo is currently adding a high load to those readings, as well as fertilizers possibly at Sea Pines, and not to exclude horse ranches that also produce a lot of nitrate, it might be time to consider working with the Regional Water Quality Control Board to get Cabrillo Estates included in the sewer collection project. Otherwise, I would like to see if that curiosity has been figured out, why those readings are so high in that area. That's one comment. And my other comment, which is my usual, is that not monitoring the private wells will never give us an idea of how much water is being extracted now or in the future. It came to mind, I have come to be friends with somebody that is outside the prohibition zone on a private well. And this woman had no idea that she was connected to our basin. And, talked about, how many problems it was for the people in the community to have to pay these for their water is so high, but that theirs is free, except for their pumping things. There's a statistic that says that up to 20% reduction on private wells occurs when people begin to be part of the entire basin management by knowing how much water they use. Currently, I understand that it's only new wells that are getting monitored, but what about properties that are freshly sold? I would like to see the county begin to monitor all wells for usage at some point. It's not that expensive from what I understand. And that would be a lot of really important information as to what's happening with our basin. Because what I see happening is private wells are realizing that their usage they can go ahead and continue using, and they are expanding. There's a property I noticed on LOVR that's on a private well that has now put in a huge ag activity in the back area.
Lindy, you've met your 3 minutes.
Draws. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindy. Was that the last public comment or only public comment, Laura?
There's no other public comment.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So with that, then we'll go ahead and adjourn to our next meeting, which will be basically a special meeting on September 16th to discuss that item that we discussed earlier, that will have an update and a path forward from Dan. So does anybody have any closing comments? If not, we'll adjourn. Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy your rest of your week.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.
All right,
Director.
thank you.